What if I told you that hidden deep beneath the Stoic solemn names in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, there lies not just a list, but a secret legacy, a tangible artifact stained with scandal, passed through the hands of women whom history has tried to erase. They did not just share the same royal bloodline, they shared the same curse. Or was it a promise? The journey we are about to begin will not only shake the way you read familiar scripture, it will shine a light into the deepest corners of your soul, upon the very scars you have always tried to hide. We promise you the conclusion of this story will leave you breathless. But before we turn back this secret page of history, let us do something special together. Pause for just a moment and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. From the cities that never sleep to the quietest villages, let us create a moment of connection together before we travel through the mists of time. Now take a deep breath. We begin. Most of us skim through the first chapter of Matthew. It reads like a dry roll call of patriarchs. This one begat that one. A long chain of 42 generations, a masculine current of power and promise. But that is the story on the surface. If you listen closely, you will hear an undercurrent, a forgotten whisper. It is not the story of the men who built kingdoms, but of the women who preserved a legacy far more sacred. And at the heart of that legacy was not a crown or a scepter, but something seemingly worthless, a piece of cloth that had witnessed everything. It did not begin in a temple or a palace. It was born from the ashes of desperation, and it was dyed with the first drop of blood from an injustice. The question is not just who these women were. The real question is, why would a holy God allow such a scandalous relic to exist? Not just to exist, but to be cherished and passed down through the very bloodline leading to his own son? The answer will challenge everything you thought you knew about sin, shame, and the boundless grace of God. Our journey begins under the harsh sun of ancient Canaan, where the dust stained everything yellow and hope was as fragile as the morning mist. Meet Elara. Her name means oak tree, a symbol of strength, but right now she felt like a withered branch, about to be broken. She was a widow, twice a widow, 2 husbands gone, leaving her in a terrifying silence, with no child to hold, no future to grasp. In her world, a childless widow was not just a tragedy. It was a slow erasure. She was invisible, a burden, a sign of displeasure from the gods. Her father-in-law was Boaz, a man of power, a pillar of the community. His word was as heavy as stone. He had promised to give his youngest son to her so she could bear an heir, so the family name would not perish. It was the law, it was his honor. For Elara, it was her only lifeline. But the days turned into seasons of harvest and planting. Elara's hair remained covered in the colors of mourning, while Boaz's promise dissolved into the air like a lie. She had been forgotten, left in her father's house, sitting in the garments of a widow, waiting for a rescue that never came. Have you ever felt that way? Left behind, forgotten by the very people sworn to protect you, when your pain becomes so familiar that no one even bothers to notice it anymore? Elara lived in that deep pit of invisibility. Desperation gnawed at her soul, and then from that darkest place, a fire ignited, a fire of defiance. If the laws of men had abandoned her, then she would seek out her own justice. That night, Elara did the unthinkable. She took off her widow's garments, the symbols of her grief and her waiting. She put on different clothes, and most importantly, she veiled her face with a simple white piece of cloth. She positioned herself by the road she knew Boaz would travel. She was no longer Elara, the forgotten daughter-in-law. She had become someone else, an anonymous shadow, a silent accusation. When Boaz passed by, he, the powerful father-in-law, did not recognize her. He saw only a woman by the road and committed the very sin he had sown with his own irresponsibility. Months later, when Elara's womb began to swell, the scandal erupted. The community's outrage rained down on her like stones. Boaz, in a fury to protect his own honor, ordered her punishment. But it was then that Elara produced the undeniable proof, the personal items of Boaz she had demanded as a pledge. The truth struck the powerful man's pride like a bolt of lightning. In the dead silence of the crowd, as Boaz looked into her eyes, he saw not shame, but a terrifying courage. And in that very moment, as Elara faced them all, a sharp point on Boaz's bracelet accidentally cut her palm. A single drop of crimson blood, brilliant and alive, fell, soaking into the white cloth she still clutched in her hand. It spread, not like a stain, but like a seal, a signature of blood, sealing her desperate act for justice. That was the moment the legacy was born. That cloth, now bearing an indelible mark, became the first artifact. While the world saw a blemish, Boaz, in his shame, bowed his head and whispered a sentence that would echo for eternity. "Her righteousness is greater than mine." But that whisper was drowned out by the judgmental murmurs of the crowd. The first relic was created not by prayer, but by tears, desperation, and a drop of blood from brokenness. For many years, that crimson-stained cloth, kept secret by Elara's lineage, began a journey of its own. It was no longer just a family memento. It became a legend, a whisper told behind closed doors. Its story crossed borders, and by a means that only destiny could explain, it found its way to the most unlikely of places, the city of Jericho. A city fortified, proud, and sinful, and the person holding it was a woman named Lyra. Lyra was the keeper of an inn nestled within the great city wall of Jericho. But her inn was not just a resting place for weary travelers. It was a place of secrets, a place where reputations could be bought and sold. Lyra was a woman scorned by society, a name whispered with contemptuous glances. But behind that hardened exterior was an observant soul, a heart that yearned for something greater, more real than what Jericho could offer. She had heard the story of the red-stained cloth, and when it came into her possession, she kept it not as a good luck charm, but as a bitter reminder of the world's injustice. To Lyra, the blood on the cloth was the blood of a woman who had to fight alone. It was a symbol of human cruelty. And then, one night, two strange men walked into her inn. They were not customers. Their eyes held a different kind of focus. They were spies from the nation of Israel, sent to scout Jericho before the coming attack. Instantly, Lyra was thrown into a life-or-death situation. The king of Jericho knew of the intruders and was searching everywhere. The guards could be at her door at any moment. This was not just a simple choice between turning them in to save herself or hiding them and facing death. For Lyra, it was a deeper internal battle. She looked at the crimson cloth, hidden away safely. What did this relic mean? Was it a curse of inescapable injustice? Proof that the world would always crush the weak? Or could it be something else? She had heard the incredible stories of the God of Israel, a God who parted the Red Sea, a God who fought for his people. Could it be that this bloodstain was not just a symbol of brokenness, but a sign of possible redemption? In that decisive moment, with the sound of the guards' footsteps echoing in the street outside, Lyra made her choice. She did not just hide the two men under the stalks of flax on her roof. She did something even bolder. She took out the crimson cloth, Elara's relic, and gave it to them. "When you return," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "hang this from my window as a sign of the promise." She was betting the lives of her entire family, not on an ordinary rope, but on the very relic that was steeped in scandal. She had turned a symbol of personal shame into a public declaration of faith. And when the great walls of Jericho came crashing down to the sound of trumpets, the only house left standing was the one marked by the thread of shame, which had now become the thread of grace. After the fall of Jericho, the lineage of Lyra, the once despised woman, was grafted into the nation of Israel. The red cloth, now bearing not only the blood of injustice but also the dust of a fallen city, was passed down as a treasured heirloom of survival. Generations later, it was given to a young woman named Seraphina. Seraphina was a foreigner from the land of Moab, a place the Israelites had always viewed with disdain. She had married an Israelite man, but tragedy struck again. Her husband died, leaving her alone in a foreign land, beside her mother-in-law, who had also lost everything. For Seraphina, this red cloth did not carry the meaning of a glorious victory or a mighty faith. For her, it was a burden. It was a foreign relic, a constant reminder that she did not belong. Every time she looked at it, she saw herself as an outsider, a woman carrying the heritage of another people, a history that was not her own. Her mother-in-law, Naomi, in her own deep grief, urged Seraphina to return to her homeland, to her people and her gods. It was the logical choice, the easier path. But as Seraphina looked into the weary, tear-filled eyes of her mother-in-law, something deep within her stirred. It was loyalty, a love that transcended bloodlines and homelands. She made one of the most beautiful vows ever uttered. "Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." But she did not just speak the words. In that moment, to seal her vow, Seraphina took out the red cloth, the heirloom of her husband's family. She bowed her head and pressed her lips to it. That kiss was not just an act of respect, it was an act of complete acceptance. She was accepting its entire history of brokenness, from the desperation of Elara to the faith of Lyra, as part of herself. She chose to embrace a legacy that was not hers by birth and make it her own. Her conflict was no longer about fitting in or being rejected. Her conflict was resolved by an act of unconditional love. And it was in the fields of Bethlehem, as she bowed to glean the leftover stalks of grain, that her loyalty was seen by a righteous man, a man who would not only redeem her life, but also the very legacy she had so bravely carried. The red cloth once again had witnessed a woman who was considered least being raised to a place of honor, not by her rights, but by her absolute faithfulness. The royal line was established. From the marriage of Seraphina, the great King David would be born. The red cloth, once the evidence of an anonymous widow, was now a royal treasure, a secret kept quietly in the palace, a reminder of humble origins and the miraculous intervention of God. Generations passed, and the relic was handed down to a noblewoman named Cassia. She was a descendant of Seraphina, a woman who lived in comfort, beautiful and protected. To her, the cloth was an old story, a family legacy, a symbol of God's favor. But one day, the safety of the palace became a gilded cage. The king, the very man who was supposed to be the shepherd of his people, saw her beauty from his rooftop, and he took her. Cassia was brought to the palace, taken by the most powerful man in the nation. The scriptures do not record her words, her protest, or her fear. Her voice was drowned out by power and lust. And when she became pregnant, a dark conspiracy was set in motion to cover the sin. Her husband, a loyal soldier, was treacherously murdered on the battlefield. Cassia's world fell apart. Her body had been violated, her husband had been murdered, and her innocent child, the fruit of that sin, died shortly after birth. Pain was piled upon pain. The silence in the palace became as heavy as a tomb. In those long, dark nights, Cassia would look at the red cloth, the relic of her ancestors, but now it no longer brought her comfort or hope. On the contrary, it had become a bitter mockery. The relic had been a symbol of God's intervention, but now, in her pain and her silence, Cassia felt completely abandoned by God. Where was the grace? Where was the justice? This cloth with the blood of Elara, the dust of Jericho, the kiss of Seraphina, now only deepened her anguish. It was a reminder of a God who had once acted, but was now silent in the face of the ultimate injustice she had suffered. One night, in a fit of despair, Cassia stood before the fire in her hearth. She clutched the cloth in her hand, determined to throw it into the flames, to burn away the legacy that had become a lie, to burn away the past, to burn away the pain. But as the heat of the fire licked at her fingers, something held her back. It was not hope. It was not even faith. It was a silent defiance, a final act of protest. She folded the cloth and she put it away in the deepest, darkest place. It was an unspoken declaration. You started this story. You allowed all of this to happen. Therefore, you must be the one to finish it. The relic, for the first time in its history, was kept not by faith, but by a painful questioning, a silent accusation aimed at the heavens. Centuries more passed. The kingdom rose and fell, enduring wars and periods of peace. The red cloth remained hidden, but its true story had begun to fade, replaced by legends and human interpretations. And then one day, a high priest, a man who saw himself as the guardian of pure faith, decided to investigate the origins of this royal relic. He unrolled ancient scrolls, questioned the elders, and pieced together the fragments of history. And what he discovered horrified him. The unclean history of the cloth was laid bare under his judgmental gaze. It came from an act of deception by a widow, Elara. It was used by a woman of a shameful profession in Jericho, Lyra. It carried the bloodline of a forbidden foreigner, Seraphina, and it had witnessed the most horrific scandal of adultery and murder in the history of the royal family, Cassia. To the priest, this was not a story of grace. It was a chain of sin and shame. He could not accept that such an unclean object was revered as a sacred treasure. With the zeal of a man who believed he was doing God's will, he stood before the public. He held the cloth high and solemnly declared it to be a cursed relic. He said it was a stain on the legacy of the house of David, a reminder of human failure, not divine power. And then he gave the order. A pyre was built in the temple courtyard. The red cloth was to be purified by fire to cleanse the nation's legacy, to erase the shameful chapters of history. This was the climax. The entire faith built over generations, the tears, the courageous acts, the silent suffering, all of it was about to be consumed by the flames of religious judgment. The crowd was silent, bewildered. Was it all just a meaningless coincidence? Was the story of redemption just a lie, and in the end, was judgment the final truth? The fire roared, licking at the air, ready to devour history itself. But in that chaotic and fearful crowd, one figure moved. An elderly woman, a descendant of the silent guardians of the relic, who knew the true story not just from scripture, but from the whispers of her mother and her mother's mother. She could not let history be burned away. With an agility that defied her age, she lunged forward, snatched the cloth from the hands of the guard about to cast it into the fire, and vanished into the crowd before anyone could react. Years later, that same woman, now near the end of her life, lay on a simple bed in a small house in a remote village called Nazareth. She knew her time was short. She called for a poor young relative, a girl with a pure heart and listening eyes. The girl's name was Miriam. The old woman tremblingly took out the crimson cloth, now faded and worn with age, and placed it into Miriam's hands. And then she did something no one had ever done before. She revealed the true meaning of the relic. She whispered, her voice weak but clear, and every word she spoke seemed to open up a new heaven. "Child," she said, "the world looks at this and sees a stain. They see deception, shame, foreign blood, and the sin of kings. But they are wrong. God looks at this and sees a prophecy." Miriam looked at her, her eyes wide with wonder. "This red," the old woman continued, her bony finger pointing to the dark, dried blood of Elara, "is not the color of shame. It is a foreshadowing of the color of the covenant blood that will be shed for the redemption of all." Elara's boldness was not sin. It was a picture of a one who would fight for the oppressed. Lyra's faith in a falling city was a picture of the hope he would bring. Seraphina's loyalty, a foreigner who was chosen, was a prophecy that his grace would be for all nations. And even Cassia's silent pain he did not forget. It was a picture of a one who would carry the griefs of all mankind. This was the truth. The relic was not a memorial to humanity's brokenness. It was a grand promise of God's future. It was not a curse, but a map leading to redemption. In that moment, all the pain, the injustice, and the courage of the women who came before found their fullest meaning. A few months later, Miriam was in her small home. She was pondering the words of the old woman, the weight of the legacy she now held. And then an extraordinary presence filled the room. An angel of the Lord appeared before her. The angel's light was brilliant, and his greeting was astounding. "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." Miriam's heart pounded. Who was she to receive such a greeting? She was just a poor girl from a forgotten village. But the angel delivered a message that was even more shocking. She would conceive and give birth to a son, and she was to call his name Jesus. He would be great and would be called the Son of the Most High. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Miriam knew exactly what was at stake: her reputation, her engagement to Joseph, even her very life. By law, she could be stoned to death. A cold fear ran down her spine, but then her gaze fell upon the small chest where the red cloth was kept. She thought of Elara, who risked everything for justice. She thought of Lyra, who bet her life on a promise. She thought of Seraphina, who chose loyalty over safety. She thought of Cassia, who endured her pain in silence but never threw the relic away. She realized this was not just her story. This was the final chapter of a story that had begun long, long ago. She was not the beginning, but she was chosen to be the completion. And then a deep and strange peace flooded her soul. She looked up, no longer seeing the angelic presence, but as if she were speaking to God himself. And from the depths of her heart, she uttered the words that would change the destiny of all humanity. "I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled." That yes was not just an act of personal faith. It was her acceptance of her role as the final link, the answer to Cassia's questioning, the fulfillment of Seraphina's loyalty, the fruition of Lyra's faith, and the final vindication for Elara's struggle. All the pain, the shame, and the hope of the women before her finally found their meaning and fulfillment in the womb of Miriam. That night in Bethlehem, there was no palace, no servants, only a cold stable and the smell of dry hay. In the silence of the night, a cry rang out, the first cry of a newborn king. Miriam, exhausted but filled with an indescribable joy, held her tiny baby in her arms. She looked around. There were no warm blankets, no fine linens to wrap the Son of the Most High. And then she remembered. With trembling hands, Miriam opened the small bag she always carried with her. She carefully took out the ancient relic, the crimson cloth with the blood of Elara, the dust of Jericho, the kiss of Seraphina, and the invisible tears of Cassia. In the dim light of the oil lamp, the cloth seemed to glow with a warm light of its own. She no longer saw it as a curse or a burden. She saw it as a blanket that had been woven with the brokenness, the courage, the faith, and the loyalty of 4 generations of women. And then Miriam gently used that very cloth, the relic of the outcasts, to wrap the baby Jesus. It was the final perfect image. The thread of injustice and shame had now become the first blanket to embrace the Redeemer of the world. The curse had become a comfort. The stain had become glory. The legacy was complete, not in a magnificent temple, but in a humble manger. The story of the forgotten women had found its ultimate voice, not in words, but in an act of love, wrapping itself around the very source of all grace. The story of the red thread does not end in that manger long ago. It continues to be woven into the fabric of each of our lives. Perhaps you are here today, listening to this story and feeling a deep connection. Perhaps you carry a past that you see as a stain, a pain you think is a curse, a brokenness you believe has disqualified you from God's plan. But through this story, we believe God is whispering to you that He sees a legacy. He sees the courage in your pain, the faith in your fear, and the loyalty in your weariness. What you see as your weakness, He sees as the very place where His power and His grace are made most glorious. If you feel that thread of grace being woven into your own story, No matter how complicated or painful it has been, leave a comment below with a single word, legacy. Let that comment be not just a word, but a declaration of faith, a declaration that your story, whatever it has held, is also a part of the grand tapestry that God is weaving. And if this story has touched you, please share it with someone you know who needs to be reminded that the most broken lives can make the most beautiful story. Thank you for joining our channel on this journey of uncovering hidden truths. There are so many more stories waiting to be told. If you do not want to miss out, make sure you are subscribed and have turned on notifications. We will see you next time for more discoveries.